We'll begin the May 24th, 2023 Taxicab Advisory Committee meeting. Before we officially get started here, or before we do the roll call, I did want to share some sad news. Our advisory committee member, John Kincaid, who represented the County of San Diego Weights and Measures Department, has passed away. Mr. Kincaid was a valued member of this committee and a very important partner in the industry. We want to recognize his assistance and dedication to taxi cab drivers and permit holders, as well as MTS over his many years of service. Lenny will be planning to send our condolences to the county and, if possible, to Mr. Kincaid's family as well. If you'd like to share any kind words, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lenny so he can relay those over to the county and to Mr. Kincaid's family. With that, we will now move to our roll call. Clerk?
Sean Rivera,
Present.
Abel Seifu, Agustin Hodoya. If you can please unmute yourself and speak into the mic.
So, oh, yeah. Here I am.
Alfred Binks is absent. Akbar Majid. Antonio Wesso.
Here.
Oh, sorry, if you can speak into the mic.
Here.
Thank you so much. David Taysom. George Abraham.
Present.
Karen Higareda is absent. Luis Vasquez.
Here.
Mark Nichols.
Mark Nichols present.
Margot Tangway.
Here.
Michael Trimble is absent. Micheline Sullivan.
Present.
Mikhail Hussein.
I'm here for Michael. Peter Zishi.
Oh, for Peters. Zawad Jima is absent, and Abel Seifu. Can you speak into the mic, please?
Yes, present.
Thank you so much. Chair, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you, clerk. All right, with that, we will now move to agenda item number 2, which is the approval of minutes. If anyone would be willing to make a motion to approve the February 22nd, 2023 minutes.
I make motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Huesos. We've got a motion there. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, I think I heard Margot first. So we've got a motion and a second. All members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any members opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Let's move to agenda item number 3, non-agenda public comment. Clerk?
We do not have any public comments.
Okay. Then let's move to item number 4.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. Let me get this started here. This will be agenda number 4 for higher vehicle industry emergent topic partnerships between taxi cabs and transportation network companies. Before we begin with this item, which is a continuance of the item that we covered in the last February 22nd meeting, I would like to issue an apology to the committee for failing to present additional information that would have clarified the partnership. We took note of all the questions that came out that day from the meeting, and we will provide clear answers and provide more insight of what that partnership looks like. The background of this proposed partnership is, first of all, transportation network company Uber has stated that they plan to add all taxi cabs in the US to its platform by 2025. They started in San Francisco, which is already in place. How this came to our attention is that Yellow Cab of San Diego, which they're a part of this committee, they just happen not to be here today, But Yellow Cab of San Diego informed For Hire Vehicle Administration of their potential partnership with Uber. The partnership is based on the City of San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency's pilot program that took effect on September of 2021. On the the last TAC meeting, February 22nd, we gathered feedback questions, and it was requested for FHBA to provide additional details on the pilot program from San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. These are the facts having to do with the pilot program. It required an amendment to the city's transportation code, Division 2, Article 1100, which is specific to the regulation of motor vehicles for hire. In other words, their ordinance. Section 1124, subsection B5 to be more specific. It had to do with the taxi fees. And that amendment included the contemplating the upfront fare pilot program, which is a document, a separate document that further details what the partnership will look like. The pilot program was established to allow taxi e-hail app providers to offer customers the ability to book a transit trip through an electronic app and to pay an upfront fare based on the taxi meter rate. The intention was to eliminate the price uncertainty and meter anxiety and to allow the taxi industry to evolve with current for hire vehicle trends. And by meter anxiety, just put in perspective, is when the passenger is looking at the meter rate continuously accruing based on time or distance. Another purpose of the pilot program was to allow taxi e-hail apps to dispatch trips that originate with third-party entities. Entities that do not receive permits issued by the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Authority, such as Uber or Lyft, which may offer upfront fares that are not based on taxi meter rates. This pilot program allows two types of trips. The first type of trip are labeled taxi pilot trips. These type of trips originate with a customer ride request through a taxi e-hail app. They are dispatched by the taxi e-hail app. Those trips are provided by a permitted San Francisco taxi driver in a permitted San Francisco taxi vehicle. The upfront fare for the trip is based on the estimated taxi meter amount. And the taxi meter for this type of trip is not running if the upfront fare provided through the taxi email app accepted by the passenger. In other words, hence the term upfront pricing. If it's $30, the meter won't accrue. Up to $30, the meter has that preset amount because it was established through the app. Now, the review of this agenda item was focused on this type of trip that I will describe. In the pilot, there's a second type of trip that's contemplated in the pilot program, and it's referred to as a third-party provided pilot trip. It originates with a customer right request through a third-party provider. That trip, and this is key, is transferred to a taxi e-hail app. Then it's dispatched to the taxi by the taxi e-hail app. The trip is provided by a permitted San Francisco taxi driver in a permitted San Francisco taxi vehicle. An upfront fare in this type of trip is not required to be based on the estimated taxi meter amount. The reason that it's not required is because it was not brokered to a taxi e-hail app. It was brokered through a third-party provider such as Uber or Lyft, which have their own surcharge in their own fare methodology. More facts is that the third-party pilot trips are considered to be taxi trips by the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency because they will be delivered in San Francisco regulated taxicabs, permitted, and also driven by San Francisco permitted taxi drivers. All state and local taxi regulations are applicable. The goals and metrics of the program covered some desired outcomes, which included improving taxi customer service by offering upfront fares, relieving meter anxiety for passengers, and allowing to shop for similar on-demand services. Another desired outcome is to increase taxi trips, to increase driver fare income, and the overall number of permitted drivers and vehicles. It also aims to maintain a consistent level of service for traditional taxi trips, including paratransit taxi trips, while allowing third-party pilot trips. Some of the metrics for this pilot program include the agency's aim to see whether this pilot program will increase eHealth app trips by 10%, to increase driver income by 10%, and or increase overall number of permitted drivers in San Francisco. The agency will be tracking complaints and the impact on traditional taxi trips as well. There are many additional requirements for the program rules and application requirements. They are heavily based on data submission by the taxi apps. The applicants, in essence, the requirements are that the applicants for this pilot program must be in good standing. In other words, the taxi apps that are required in San Francisco, they must be duly permitted. The taxi companies must be duly permitted, and also the drivers participating in the program must be in good standing in terms of their license requirement, their personal license requirement. And once again, taxi eHealth apps must meet the agency's data submission requirements, which are comprehensive and very extensive in terms of data submission, trips, compensation, many things to know. But it should be noted that they are very, very heavily dependent on data. The following questions were gathered from the last meeting, February the 2nd, in specific, in essence, on how these trips would represent. And we compiled those questions and the answers. And one of the questions were, are taxicab trips provided considered Uber trips? As I mentioned earlier, these type of trips provided by third pilots trips, i.e. Uber, Lyft, are considered to be taxi trips by the San Francisco agency because they will be delivered in San Francisco regulated taxi cabs by permitted San Francisco taxi drivers. And all state and local taxi regulations are applicable. Another question was, if taxicabs or taxicab drivers able to accept or decline trips? The answer is yes. Based on the pilot program requirements, the taxi eHealth app must demonstrate that taxi drivers have the ability to opt out of servicing third pilot trips on a universal or on a per trip basis. What this means is that if any driver in San Francisco does not like the idea, they do have the option to opt out completely, or if they do like the idea, they do retain the option to accept any trip based on an individual per trip basis. Are any additional taxicab vehicle markings required? No, the pilot program does not mention additional marking requirements for those taxicabs. Are taxicab drivers allowed to charge more than the maximum rate? Yes. The upfront fare is not required to be based on the estimated taxi meter amount. So for these type of trips, the upfront fare would be based on whatever, in this case, Uber is charging at the time where that trip is being requested. It could be more or it could be less than the established fares by the agency. The following questions are more specific to the implementation of this partnership here in San Diego. And one of them was, will MTS regulate Uber trips provided by Yellow Cab? The answer is that assuming if MTS would take the municipal transit agency's pilot approach, as San Francisco is doing, MTS would make the appropriate MTS ordinance number 11 revisions to allow third-party provider trips that would have to comply with all applicable taxicab regulations. Would there be a different regulation criteria for drivers or vehicles? Assuming MTS would take the pilot program approach, No, there would not be different regulations between drivers and vehicles. Third-party provider trips that are referred to a taxi e-hail app would be considered at all times a taxi trip because they will be delivered in MTS regulated taxi vehicles by permitted MTS taxi drivers in a similar fashion as San Francisco. Would these trips only be available under the Uber app? Assuming MTS would take the same approach as San Francisco, the answer is no. Any third-party provider, Uber, Lyft, or anybody else that would fall under that category, any third-party provider would be able to refer trips to an authorized taxi e-hail app. Uber is currently the only third-party provider participating in this partnership in San Francisco. Theoretically, there could be more, but we need to make clear that Uber is the only one that's currently participating in this pilot program. Would a driver have to join Yellow Cab to provide these trips? Drivers would be able to join any dispatch service that establishes a partnership with Uber or any other third-party provider. In this case, it's up to Uber to decide who they would like to establish a partnership with. And whoever they did establish a partnership with, then that dispatch service would be able to participate. Would drivers need a tablet or a similar hardware device to provide these trips? The answer is yes. Upfront fair pricing or the ability to accept or decline these type of trips, it's not possible without an electronic device. It could be a tablet or it can be an app on a phone. When is a taxi driver subject to Ordinance 11 versus when is a taxi driver considered to be an Uber driver? Assuming MTS would take the same approach as the city of San Francisco, taxi drivers would remain at all times subject to MTS Ordinance 11, irrespective of whether they provide traditional originated trips, meaning a walk-up or a phone call referral for the dispatch service, or if they receive a trip from a third-party provider. At all times, driver remain subject to Ordinance 11 regulations. Which insurance limits apply for these trips? Because they're being provided by a taxi cab, the current limits for the requirements for a taxi cab would apply. And the current taxi cab insurance limits are 350,000 combined single limit. Taxi cabs and transportation network companies apply different airport surcharges for airport trips. In this case, which surcharge would apply? The applicable surcharge would depend on the method by which the trip was booked. If it was booked by a third-party provider, then that would, in this case, Uber's applicable surcharge would apply. Or if it was a traditional walk-up, then the walk-up surcharge would apply, which is currently at $298 in the San Diego airport. How will the airport direct taxi cabs to the holding lot, terminal islands, and virtual queue based on the type of trips? That's to be determined by the airport. The airport has stated that they would expect Uber to propose our operational plan because this before this partnership took effect in the airport property. Before I go to the next steps, I do want to thank some of the members of this committee who followed up with these questions, and they were excellent questions and provided guidance for us to bring clarity. The next steps are to request, we could request Uber Technologies to provide an operational plan for San Diego. We're considering a possible draft and ordinance revisions to enable this concept to take place in San Diego, similarly with a similar approach to San Francisco, and develop guidelines and requirements for taxi e-hail apps. And I should know that there's currently 2 here in San Diego, 2 dispatch services that have an operational app. One of them is Ride Yellow from Yellow Cab, and the other one it's Ride United that also includes a very convenient feature of a soft meter. So there's 2 that are already here. They're operating. There's no guidelines for their operation, but the meters surpassed many of the requirements that are industry standards. And finally, we want to request feedback from this committee on how to implement this strategy for the partnership to take place. That concludes the presentation, Chair.
Thank you so much, Lenny. All right, first, I just want to say thank you for all the research that you did. Clear you did a lot in preparation for this conversation, so thank you for that. We'll begin the committee's conversation with Mr. Hueso.
Chair.
Oh, public comment. Yes, go ahead.
Izzy Ayala, can you make your way to the podium?
Hello, hey, thanks for allowing me to speak. I believe I have, what, 3 minutes? Okay, so I think Mr. Fuel did an amazing job in explaining what we're doing. My name is Izzy Aala from Flywheel Technologies. We're the ones that kind of established this partnership back in October 2020, believe it or not, is when we started the discussions with Uber. Because going out of this pandemic, we wanted a way to kind of help figure out how do we grow our industry, our taxi industry. I've been in the taxi software technology business since 2002, so almost over 20 years. And I've seen our industry grow and then shrink and then really get decimated during the pandemic. So it was a bold move from us to kind of work with one of the biggest businesses that generate tremendous amount of demand, which is Uber. So we struck a relationship. They didn't really understand what we were trying to do. And I think Mr. Fuel really described the end result of a very long process to kind of do what we're doing in San Francisco. The results are amazing. We had to prove a lot of people wrong in a lot of these ways, because why are we partnering with Uber when they're the ones that help destroy the industry? And so we had to overcome a lot of that politics, but the technology is also a tremendous amount of technology we had to apply to kind of integrate this concept between the third party like Uber into a taxi system. So this is the biggest concept. This is a taxi ride. It's governed by taxi rules. Pricing is the one thing that we have to kind of talk about. But the concept is, though, will riders accept a taxi when they originally booked an Uber? Tremendously was yes. And it was very carefully, meticulously analyzed by Uber, because this is their customers and want to make sure they don't alienate them when they're on Uber X and a taxi shows up. So you have to understand, they're going to protect it with everything they got. And they spent a lot of money and resources doing this. Then will a taxi driver accept this ride from an Uber customer, right? They have full control. They see full transparency. They see what they're going to earn, where the pickup is going to be, where the pickup drop off will be, and they can calculate their mind. Is this a good fare? You know, because they'll know what they're going to earn. And these drivers are smart. They'll know, and they'll decline it full, and they don't get penalized. It's just a tremendous amount of demand. They're going to see some fares that are really good. They're going to take it. We've been running now for 6 months live with 100% of Uber passengers. And
30
it's beyond,
seconds left.
how much?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. And it's blown away any numbers that we actually set forth. So we hit the metrics. Can we get regulators to support this? Can we get riders to accept a taxi when they were taking an Uber? And will drivers benefit from this? All check marks. All right. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Horacio Sanchez, please make your way to the podium. That concludes public comment, Chair.
All right, thank you. Let's now turn to Mr. Hueso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lenny, this question is for you, first of all. I think item number 5 of the list of items, you didn't cover it. It says, are taxi cabs required to have the taxi meter engaged during the duration of the trip?
No, under this pilot program, under both types of pilot trips, because it would be a prearranged upfront pricing, then the meter wouldn't necessarily ran. It would just, the upfront price that was either given by the taxi app or the third-party provider, that's the amount that would just be solid on that display, whether it be a cell phone or a tablet. Therefore, with the purpose of avoiding meter anxiety. So for instance, if the taxi trip, if the upfront price is $20, the passenger would just see that upfront price, either in their device and also in the device of the taxi cab. The meter would not accrue.
Thank you. I think the person that made the presentation, if I'm correct, Mr. Izzy, I think it's important that we understand what his background is. When we used to, USA Cab, have an app called Flywheel, Izzy was instrumental in taking over that app, trying to do something with it. So the information that he's presenting will not solve, but give you more information to assess what was being told at the prior meeting. At the prior meeting, we were thinking there was something behind the scenes being created. The yellow cab was trying to take advantage of an opportunity. Here, Izzy has been instrumental in developing this relationship and trying to propose it in some other places. Now, there is, from what I hear in conversations taking place, people are concerned with equipment that's going to be necessary to provide this service. And from what I saw in San Francisco when I was in the early beginnings of Uber, a lot of drivers are using a separate cell phone. So Lenny just said that a soft meter and any electrical instrument can be used as far as a cell phone can be used. There was drivers using multiple units as far as cell phones and apps in cars in San Francisco, and that's how they would address the service provider that they were servicing. So I think it's something that's an option from what I understand, because it's informational, and it's something to give drivers another opportunity to work. So just want to make that reference to Izzy, because it didn't come from Yellow Cab, it came from Izzy, from my understanding. And he's trying to address it in other cities that might want to take an opportunity and get involved with this, with the app. So that's all I wanted to share. Thank you, Chair and Mr. Lenny.
Thank you. Mr. Lichi, and then we'll go to Mr. Banks. and Mr. Staples. You're good? All right, Mr. Banks?
Yeah, does that mean the taxi have to have a tablet to work with Uber? If the taxi want to work with the Uber, do they have to have a tablet?
Yes, Alfred, it could be a tablet, it could be a phone, it could be on any type of electronic equipment that would have an electronic display. Number one, for the passenger to see what the amount is, that was the upfront fare. And number two, for it to connect with, for the taxi app, in this case, Flywheel, or in this case, Yellow Cab, to connect on the back technology end with the Uber specifications. So yes, an electronic device would be needed.
Who is paying for that device? Is that Uber or the taxi driver?
We don't have that type of information because we're not at that point yet. That would be something that could be answered by the dispatch service that's engaging in this partnership. But what I can tell you is that that the dispatch service in this case usually provides the software to the taxi driver to enable this partnership to take place. But that's up to the taxi dispatch to figure that out with their subscribers.
Okay, other Uber people, sometimes going to LAX is very far away, very expensive. They refuse that. But if your taxi, they book you to go LAX, can you also refuse that if they join Uber? Because going to LAX, it takes many hours, and the taxi doesn't want to waste time for Uber price to go to LAX.
For these types of trips, the driver, as I mentioned, they do have the option to decline or accept trips. So they will, if they don't want to go to LAX, then they can just decline the trip. So they can opt out. They would have an option.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
All right, Mr. Staples?
Thank you for giving me this chance. I just have a few questions for Mr. Fewell. Right now, I saw one of the guy from Flywheel. And is there if I know right now we're talking about Uber and Yellow Cab, but in the future, let's say company A will gonna show up in San Diego and they want to start working with the drivers like myself, do they have a certain guidelines they have to follow? Is that like a printed guidelines they have to follow, or do they have to come to MTS, negotiate how they're gonna operate their business and start working with us, you know? As you know, we have a long wait time and a lot of drivers are desperate to join any companies that's out there to give us some business. And if there is a chance for us to come to work with these people, what would be the guidelines? What would be the requirements from, especially from the company side? So we're gonna have a smooth transition, a smooth operation for us to join any TNC companies. So I just want to ask this question.
Sure. And by company, you mean, Abel, you mean?
Like right now, we have lived in here, so I've been in touch with them about how we're gonna start signing up drivers instead of, right now I see only Uber and Yellow Cab. So I don't want, you know, this thing to be monopolized by one company only. So if there's other companies out there that are willing to work, you know, otherwise we'll be forced to work only with Uber and Yellow. That's it, that's the dead end. So I don't want that to happen. I want to have more option for us. So it's gonna have a better option to earn more money. So if, let's say, Mr. Liz want to work with the drivers, what would be the requirement? What would be the guidelines, and what's the minimum requirement, I would say, for him to start signing up drivers?
Absolutely. And the intent of this item, in a related item that I'll cover here in a little bit too, is to enable, to take the necessary steps and enable the regulations, not for Yellow. It needs to be clear that this is not at the request of Yellow. Our intention is to enable the rules and regulations for any company and the drivers, as you mentioned, to have options and be able to take advantage of this partnership. At this point, it just happened to be Yellow who brought up to our attention this partnership. But as of now, as you mentioned, the gentleman from Flywheel, and it could be any other company too, and I think that's what you're referring to. It could be Flywheel, it could be Curb, it could be, there are, I'm not gonna say an infinite number of products, but there are many companies out there that should be welcome to come into any city, but right now we won't have that clarity in terms of, you know, the ordinance revisions that would allow a quick implementation. So the goal is, as I said here, to take feedback from the committee and take the necessary steps to see what's the best approach to enable Uber. In this case, they're the only ones that are doing it, but as I mentioned, it could be Lyft. It could be another TNC company that operates up in San Francisco that they want to come down here in San Diego. So the goal is to have that option and enable that option at some point for not only for Uber, not only for Yellow Cab, for any dispatch service that's currently meets the standards, and for any third-party dispatch or third-party provider in this case to take that advantage and be able to offer their services here in San Diego.
But Mr. Fewell, there is, but the standard is out there for them to look at it, so they would go through it exactly. Like, you know, you have to have this. I know you told us they need to have salt meter and stuff like that. So is there like a printed out requirements, a minimum requirement?
No, that's we want to implement that. We want feedback from the committee on how to revise guidelines for dispatch services and how to come up with guidelines to implement this. As of now, we don't have them.
So currently, if someone is interested, they have to come to you first, if they're gonna allow them to work or not, right?
Right now, if they're going to be in the business of dispatching trips in San Diego, they have to have express authorization from MTS. And there's only 9 authorized dispatch services to do so. So anybody else that's outside of these 9 dispatch services would not be able to come into business and dispatch trips as of now.
Okay.
Yeah, going back to what Mr. Oeso was, his line of think or questioning. Regulations right now say that even if you have an upfront ride, you have to leave the taxi meter running, correct? Yeah. Can I assume that the reason you do that is because the customer wants to make sure that the upfront fare matches what the taxi meter says they should pay? Is that the idea, that that's sort of a check on whatever price the driver said they'll do?
Yes, that is a concept for the passenger to understand that that upfront price would not, it's not more than what the meter price would have been.
Okay, yes, so now a different issue is meter anxiety, where somebody's looking not to ensure that they're not getting cheated, but now they're worried because the clock's running and you're driving down the road. So meter anxiety is something different than people checking the meter to make sure that their upfront price is right. And our solution up until now, because we didn't care about meter anxiety, was that we required the meters when the people knew they were getting a fair price, correct? Okay, so my question is, if we're not gonna run the meter anymore to combat meter anxiety, then how is the customer to know that the upfront price that you quoted them for a taxi ride is really what the meter authorizes them to carry?
Correct. So under this scenario, that wouldn't apply for a trip that was booked through a third-party provider, right? Because I
Right.
think we made clear that the taxi fare would not apply.
Right.
If it was booked through the taxi app, which in this case, Ride United,
Yeah.
if it was booked through the app from Ride United, the parameters, what the city of San Francisco is doing is through data and through meter certification, like the one that Ride United just went through, that upfront pricing based on GPS technology, that the algorithm would come up with a very, very close, by pennies.
So they're gonna trust the meter. I mean, they're gonna trust it. They're gonna
That
say,
is, yes.
got it, okay.
Yeah, the concept is that through data gathering and the algorithm that's provided by those apps, that upfront pricing is not, they don't use the term identical, but it's fairly close, almost to what the taxi meter would have been.
Jason?
Just looked at your presentation back here regarding the meter and everything, the maximum rate and all that stuff. Somebody gets an Uber request through the taxi app and wants to take a ride at 8 o'clock at night. And at 8 o'clock at night, the rate, let's say they're going to town and country. The Uber app says $65. Customer accepts that, and pushes it in. Taxi driver turns on the meter as required to by state law right now for the meter ride. When they get to that location, they found the meter is only $38 or $35. Now, who's gonna pay? What are they gonna pay? They can pay the 35, they're gonna pay the 65.
Well, the pilot program, in this case, the enabling technology, the tablet or the app, the meter will not be running. The 60, did you say $60? The amount that was agreed upon by,
Well,
by the
Uber
past,
charges $65. Let's
Yeah.
say Uber charges $65 to go to town and country. We charge 38 to go to town and country, or 38, $39 to town and country from here, from the airport. Or say from downtown. It's still the same basis premises. We're looking at, and I got two inspectors back there in the corner there, just sitting there. And when they see us drive away, under the new program here you're proposing, those two gentlemen won't be able to stop us if we're high flag. Correct?
we would develop steps based on this and safeguards for us to understand when that meter was booked through a third-party provider or when it was actually a taxi meter.
How? How's that gonna happen? How is that gonna happen? In San Francisco, they don't have, they'll all go through the soft meter program, correct?
I'm,
In San Francisco,
Yes.
according to your data information, all the trips have either a soft meter or regular meter for the service.
Mhm.
And under what the app for the taxi app, the app has to go through a soft meter, correct?
well, we need to distinguish what the use of a soft meter is, in this case, accruing rate flag drop.
Right, but
Or-
but the lights, we're talking about tax sites, okay? We drive down the street, the lights are on. We drive down the street, we got people in the car, lights are on. Those two gentlemen back in the corner, they're gonna say, hey, wait, what's going on here? Let's have a little talk. about
I can
it."
assure you, Mr. Taysom, that we would develop the right steps, and if you allow me to continue without being interrupted, I can tell you exactly how we would do it. So
Go ahead.
number one, as inspectors, we would be able to come into the vehicle and see if a soft meter is activated. If a soft meter is activated, that shows up, that shows us that the taxi cab rate applies. Therefore, either that trip was booked through the taxi app or it was a walk-in. However, if we come up and we see under this pilot program, and I'm just talking theoretically here, that if we don't see a soft meter running, and instead of that, we see an upfront fare, that would be indicative for our staff that trip was either prearranged, either by the taxi app or by the third-party provider. So we would know, I can assure you, we could make a distinction on how that trip was brokered or booked. I hope that answers your question, but I can assure you in practical ways, that's how we would be able to tell what type of trip it was.
All right, so I want to make sure we get through the full agenda. I know that I also recognize that this is an important topic. So we'll have a couple more questions. Mr. Seifu will go back to Mr. Waisu and, sorry. Because Mr. Abraham is not spoke yet. We'll go to Mr. Abraham first. See if he can perhaps ask a question that others have. Let's see how long that takes and then we'll go from there. Mr. Abraham?
Okay, maybe I'm with Yellow Cab and I'm using that smart meters. So we have an app call, we have flat rate, we have meter. So there is no difference. It will tell you exactly. Cars have no lights, whatever it is. So it will tell you everything, where you go, where you don't go. You have accept or no. So it's already here. The problem is, with the Yellow Cab, they have to dominate the business. That's the question we have, unless it's not hard to do it. It's already here, we're using it, and it's good. So there's advantage and disadvantage to the driver also. The disadvantage of the driver is if the traffic stops for hours, stuck there, you lose. They pay the same thing, okay? You stay 3 hours, the fare is flat, that's it. So you're losing money. Sometimes you have more advantage, then you have more calls, then you can make money. Okay, so but the system is here already and there is no problem for it. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Seifu and then Mr. Waisu, and then we'll wrap it up.
So my question will be, I know the airports issue will be to be determined according to this response, but is there like a timeline when if this partnership launch it, and is there a timeline when maybe the airport will consider talking about this issue with their stakeholders? I know Mark is here, so I just want to ask this question directly. Thank you.
Yeah, the airport's fully willing to participate in any MTS authorized and regulated payment method or ride hail tool or software tool that is authorized with MTS. So if the taxi industry and MTS are ready to start a pilot program, the airport's more than willing to participate, and we can do that at any time. We just need a week or 2 weeks notice to make sure we have everything working at the airport regarding trip fees and staging locations, pickup locations, to make sure our officers understand the differences between a prearranged ride that was selected through Uber and then through Flywheel, or if it's a regular flag drop ride. But we don't have any issue with that. We can pivot very quickly to implement whatever pilot program MTS wants to implement.
Sorry, can you speak into the mic?
My concern is right now you see there is a lot of chaos at the airport when there is, especially when there is busy time. And if there is a driver would say, oh, I have a Yellow Cab app picking up a customer from the airport, how this will be managed, especially going to the terminals. Because right now I see there is a lot of problems when someone is going into, some of them, they just, as you heard it, they close the transponder to pick up customers.
Well,
So if that issue happens, then how are you going to be managing? Now you add this thing on top of that, that's going to make it chaos.
To the chair's point, I don't want to take too much time, but according to what Lenny said, I agree with him that whether you're using the meter or you have a cell phone indicating which type of trip it is, the traffic officers will be able to tell what it is, whether it's the prearranged fare from Uber or Lyft that was then sent down to a taxi app, and then to your vehicle, or whether you're doing a regular flag drop ride with a soft meter. Either way, we'll be able to tell which device you're using in the car, and we could do it that way. But we're more than happy to partner with MTS and the Warner Committee if we want to have a working group meeting. I think it might be helpful for Lenny to go through the process, a customer requests a ride from Uber, that's then transferred to Flywheel. Then a taxi is dispatched from one of the 9 authorized dispatch services to the airport under that Flywheel app, and see how that works. I think that a workflow of how that happens for all of the drivers would probably be helpful, but we're more than willing to work with you on this, and it could
But,
be.
Mark,
yeah.
I'm just worried, not, Yellow Cab to monopolize all the business out there, they get a chance, maybe Yellow Cab will be the only one operating at the airport, so I don't want that to happen, in the future, we want all to have equal opportunities to work, so just to make sure. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Hueso, and then I think Mr. Julian over there. Do you want to get to the next item? So let's try to, let's try to land the plane here.
I'm just gonna make a recommendation for everybody because part of the to understand this, you have to look at the devices or the apps, how they operate. There's currently drivers doing delivery of packages, and they're taxi drivers. They go by the app. The app tells them what to charge. They deliver the package or the food. I mean, it's happening right now where the drivers have that option, and somebody has accepted their vehicle to service that trip. And right now, there's various drivers that are doing delivery of services. So I'm encouraging you for the next meeting as we go through this process to learn about some of these apps, how they operate. Uber's app tells the customer upfront, this is what your charge is from point A to point B. So you already know what the charge is. They use a device for that. We use a meter. So Lenny and several people, even Mark, have already stated that depending on the device you're using, it's going to tell you what the rates are. So there's going to be any deception or anything. The device is going to tell you what's going to charge. So I invite you to learn about the apps, the systems being used, and a lot of your questions will be answered. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Mr. Hodoyan.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for no, not Lenny, those two guys. With the yellow app or any other soft meter, I would assume there's a way for me to establish any number or, any, if a customer jumps in, I can say $100 and I can type it in on my app. How do you police that, if you will, for lack of a better term, or how do you stop that? I can choose any number that I want to. So how do you deal with that? Customer
I
complaint?
can answer that question, Agustin, on
Okay.
behalf of the inspectors.
Yeah.
What's your question again, please?
Okay, with the soft app, I can establish a number. In other words, I can put a flat fee. Say somebody jumps in from downtown, wants to go to PB, I can put $40, $50,
Would the
whatever.
meter be running at the same time if you do that?
No.
Then
it'll-
it's illegal. Then you're not able to do that. And I need to talk to you
Okay,
after this
all
meeting.
right, I would just
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Lenny, thank you again for all the research and work
course.
that went into the presentation. This is an information item, no action being taken here. I think this is the beginning of a conversation, and what Lenny and Samantha are trying to do is ensure that folks here have information about what's going on, hear what questions and concerns there are, which can simultaneously allow us to be ready for changes that might be coming, be in a position to adapt, but to do so in a way that is most comfortable for the most number of folks involved. So thank you again for all the work in bringing the item to us. Let's move to item number 5.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the committee to all those questions. Agenda number 5 covers the taxicab wheelchair accessible vehicle policy recommendations. A background on this item: on October of 2020, the city of San Diego removed a requirement that permit holders with 2 or more permits would have to purchase wheelchair accessible vehicles for 50% of those permits. In other words, if you wanted to expand your business and get additional permits, half of those permits additional to those 2 that you already have would have to be wheelchair accessible vehicles. And the purpose of that policy was precisely to allow the market entry and permit holders to purchase wheelchair accessible vehicles. The method proved ineffective in adding taxicab wheelchair accessible vehicles. therefore, the change to the policy. In lieu of that, Prior Vehicle Administration began developing a wheelchair accessible vehicle policy to incentivize the entry of taxi cab wheelchair accessible vehicles. And the way we did that was by working with taxi industry stakeholders, such as our committee members, analyze industry standards and policies from other regulatory agencies. We also conducted a peer regulatory agency review on the policies or incentives that other agencies had, and we identified key community stakeholders. The development of the policy consisted on a peer agency review. We selected the city of Sacramento, San Francisco, city of Houston, Texas, and the city of Chicago. We identified community stakeholders that have knowledge and were well-versed in accessibility issues. We reached out to the City of San Diego Accessibility Advisory Board. We reached out to the SANDAG, San Diego Association of Governments Social Services Advisory Council, and also to our own MTS Accessible Services Advisory Committee. We requested data from dispatch services, from other public transit agencies, from public transit and other agencies on their wheelchair accessible vehicle trips. We reached out to Orange, to USA Cab. Mr. Wessel, thank you for providing us with that information. We also reached out to Orange Dispatch and Patriot Dispatch. These three dispatches are the only ones that currently operate the 7 wheelchair accessible vehicles that are in service in San Diego. We also compiled data from MTS on our fixed route wheelchair deployments, from North County Transit on the same wheelchair deployments, and for FACT, which is facilitated access to coordinated transportation, and also to the San Diego Airport on data on to establish a demand for wheelchair accessible vehicle trips. We also conducted, you might recall, a passenger and taxi driver survey. We collaborated with San Diego State with their Center for Community Research Engagement, with UCSD, the Sign Lab, and also with the University of Cambridge in England, with their expertise in drafting the questions and the survey design. The survey was distributed via email through the San Diego region from November of 2021 through the end of January 2022. And the respondents were able to complete the survey on a computer or a mobile phone in English and Spanish. There are more details in the agenda packet. I invite you to take a look at it with more detail as far as the results. But the key findings that we got from, in terms of incentives, is that the city of Chicago provides direct financial incentives for the purchase, conversion, and maintenance of taxi cab wheelchair accessible vehicles. San Francisco provides fee waivers, financial incentives for prior transit trips that are provided by regulated taxi cabs, airport taxi queue privileges, and also assists taxi cab access to available grants for purchase of wheelchair accessible vehicles. I should note that these two agencies, unlike us, they do have access to cities' general funds, so their budget is considerably larger than the one that our cost recovery budget here for Highway Vehicle Administration. As far as the survey, 80% of the passenger respondents stated that they were not aware of of having an option to acquire a trip through a wheelchair accessible taxi cab. That was one of the, in my opinion, one of the biggest takeaways. And reason for it is that, as I mentioned, there's only 7 wheelchair accessible taxi cabs operating as we speak. And at the time of the survey, there were only 3. Also, 70% of the respondents stated they would use a wheelchair accessible vehicle taxi cab for medical or leisure entertainment purposes. So not only to follow up, to a clinic or a medical related visit, but also to go to a Padre game, baseball game, or a dinner. Public transit, bus and trolley, or having a friend or a relative provide transportation in a wheelchair accessible vehicle were the top 2 ways our wheelchair passengers secure their trips. So once again, trolley or bus, or asking a friend to give them a ride to where they need to go. Over half of the respondents to the survey said they would definitely use a taxi cab wheelchair accessible vehicle if that taxi cab was available 24 hours. If it was available for on demand, in other words, they didn't have to book it 48 hours or 24 hours in advance. They can make a phone call or go through an app and make sure that that vehicle would show up at their point of pickup at a reasonable time. They also would definitely consider using a wheelchair accessible vehicle taxi cab if the driver was trained and certified to provide wheelchair accessible vehicle trips. They also stated definitely considering using a wheelchair accessible vehicle taxi cab if booking such vehicle was convenient and affordable. And that's where technology comes in as far as convenience in booking trips. 85% of the driver respondents believe that it is important for San Diego or any city for that matter to have taxi cabs, wheelchair accessible vehicles. So that's a good sign. Our drivers are aware. 85% of them believe that there is a need. However, only 45 responded being interested in acquiring or operating a taxi cab wheelchair accessible vehicle. We dug a little bit more into the reasons, and 48, half of those drivers responded that they have concerns over higher operating costs. For instance, more gas consumption or higher insurance costs. 35% of the respondents were concerned with the increased time needed to assist a wheelchair accessible vehicle passenger and only being able to charge the same amount of fare. This is true. It requires additional time to assist the passenger to board the vehicle, secure the wheelchair, and the same process once they get into the destination. And based on federal law, the amount has to be the same. There is no distinction in fares between a passenger that's able and a passenger that's in need of a wheelchair accessible vehicle. Based on the survey, the respondents, driver respondents answered that the incentives that are needed to increase the number of wheelchair accessible vehicles, 45, almost 50% of them indicated financial assistance towards the purchase of a wheelchair accessible vehicle. They tend to be more expensive than a regular sedan if purchased new, or if purchased used, or conversions associated with installing a ramp on a regular van, they're also expensive. So that is a valid reason for them to indicate that financial assistance was needed. 18% wanted a guaranteed number of trips, meaning that if they were able, hence the answer, if they're able to get X amount of trips, then they would make the cost calculations to see if it's profitable for them to operate that cab. 6% of them stated that lower or no permit fees would be a good incentive. And a smaller amount of percentage, 3%, wanted lower insurance premiums. And another 3% required or would like more driver training. Based on that, our recommended strategies for our policy is number one, the waiver of annual renewal application and transfer fees for this type of a wheelchair accessible taxi cab. We would also recommend other agencies to waive the fees for these type of taxi cab vehicles. We would recommend the airport to waive their current processing fee for a ground transportation permit. We would also recommend the sheriffs to waive fees related to the issuing or renewals of driver ID cards for drivers that operate these type of vehicles. And we would also recommend for county ways and measures to waive the annual meter registration fees for wheelchair accessible vehicles. We would also recommend for the airport to consider installing a designated taxi cab spot at the airport taxi queue or the airport islands. They're currently under construction, but this would be a great incentive, meaning that taxi cabs that are wheelchair accessible would be able to provide a trip and then come back and pretty much go to the front of the line as an incentive to get more business. We would also recommend for the airport to consider an exception to potential airport electric vehicle requirements for taxi cabs. Mr. Nichols may elaborate a little bit more on that once we get to that point. But the airport is going through electric vehicle requirements for their personal, for their business fleets, their shuttles. So we could expect at some time that those would also extend to ground transportation providers to include taxi cabs. So a waiver for those requirements would provide certainty for wheelchair accessible vehicle permit holders that their investment in buying such a vehicle is secure for a determined time, not having to comply with those electric vehicle requirements. Also include a recommendation to the airport to include taxi cab, wheelchair accessible vehicles to be considered in their clean vehicle conversion incentive program, which provides additional incentives that the airport determines on their own and with their board. We will also research MTS with research available grant opportunities for taxi cab, wheelchair accessible vehicles. Our grant department will assist us with that, and we would provide that information to the permit holders. That way, on their own, they can seek this information. We know that in the past, permit holders really won't necessarily know where to look. It's a convoluted process trying to go through many agencies and trying to find out where those available grants are. We would assist with providing that information. And finally, before the final point, we would also increase outreach on the availability of taxi cab wheelchair accessible vehicles to the public. As I mentioned, 80% of those respondents don't even know that there's wheelchair accessible vehicles in San Diego. So MTS will actively look for ways to increase outreach of this service to the public. And finally, we would increase outreach on information on available incentives and benefits of operating a taxi cab wheelchair accessible vehicle to the for-hire vehicle industry, meaning individual permit holders, dispatch services, or anybody that has a stake in the industry on the benefits of operating this type of vehicle. Our next steps is to receive feedback from this committee and incorporate any necessary changes to the draft policy recommendation attached to the final packet of this agenda. And to provide afterwards, we will finalize it with the approval from the MTS Chief Executive Officer. And we would begin implementation of the policy by meeting with the airport, the sheriffs, and weights and measures to explain the benefits of the strategies that I just covered, and also to develop guidelines for implementing fee waivers, outreach plans to the public and the taxi cab industry. That concludes this presentation, Chair, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Lenny. Clerk, do we have public comment?
We do. Isiala, please make your way to the podium.
Hello again. So this is an agenda item that's actually very near and dear to my heart. I started a company, like I said, it's called Cab Connect 20 years ago, and solely to put credit card systems in the cabs in Chicago. That's how I got into the business in taxis. What I saw was, though, there was a tremendous amount of vouchers that were being run by the city to pay and subsidize rides for paratransit. And I went and my approach was to streamline that, make it more error-free, prevent fraud. And so we won a contract in there in 2008 in the city of Chicago, millions of dollars of savings, right? So, but what I've seen is what this program does with wheelchair on demand, it really changed the lives of people. Imagine having to always plan 24 hours in advance in your life. You want to go get something to eat, groceries, that's the next day. What we've done is an on-demand paratransit wheelchair offering. We've done it in San Francisco, in New York, dozen cities. And we've done it where we streamline and reduce the fraud. And so I get your incentives. I see what you're trying to do. I've seen it, talked to a lot of committees. I presented on this stuff. At the end of the day, it's a business for drivers, and you have to give them enough business to be able to justify the cost, because there are costs, and you can't charge anything more. So that's the key. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of silo work from Medicare, Medicaid, all these different little pieces that have wheelchair vans, when they could really take that and put that into the current wheelchair vehicles within the city. again, I see a lot of money being poured into this, a lot of incentives. And it is a challenging topic. 20 years I've been tackling this, but we've seen some good results. And I think we have kind of a playbook on how to do it. In San Francisco, Flywheel is the central dispatch. I think that's a very key piece. If you're trying to figure out, there's 7 wheelchair vans spread around three fleets here, I have to call each one and see if they're available. Central dispatch is such an important piece, very highly politicized. Why am I going to be treated this way, that way? We've done that. We democratized it. You know, every wheelchair van in San Francisco can take the Flywheel app and get their own on-demand van service. And any subsidized programs is facilitated through that app. You know, so it changes the lives of people. I think it's a very important thing. We do it, and you do it here. I fully support it. As I said, this is near and dear to me, and
30 seconds left.
we've seen literally lives change because of an on-demand wheelchair service. That's it. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the public comment. Nobody in Chicago has ever been accused of fraud before, right? Never. All right. We will now go to committee member questions and comments. Thank you again, Lenny, for the work you put into this as well. Obviously, lots of research and time. Do we have committee questions and comments? Mr. Hueso, and then do we have another question over there? And then we'll go to Mr. Banks. If you turn the mics on, that makes it easy for me to see who'd like to speak. Mr. Hueso?
As a member of the industry that's been providing the service for quite some time, I'd say more than 15 years, I've gained some knowledge that this is not an easy topic to lay on the responsibility just of the taxi industry. There are permits that are called N permits, non-emergency vehicle permits. To my recollection, they're providing some of that service, that wheelchair service. Correct, Lenny?
Yes, that is correct.
How many of them do we have in circulation that MTS regulates?
I can, tell you right now. 503.
Okay, so that's something that should be announced to the public too, because when they call me and they ask for on-demand service, and I tell them, you know, we have to schedule or the calls for wheelchair accessible because we're limited with 2. I try to give them some of the numbers, and them numbers not online, and I think they're important to put into the equation of MTS of possibilities for customers that are seeking transportation, and that would help add an additional amount of permits that are available, because I've learned that in this industry, if you're not interested in servicing that sector of the industry, you're not going to do it, because it takes a certain business plan and certain type of drivers that you need to have your plan of attack of service, because it is a difficult market to service. It's very inclined to get you in trouble if you're not doing it the right way. So those that have decided to provide that service and are providing it, we should announce more of that option to the general public, number one. Number two, when I applied for these permits, I found out that not every driver in the taxi industry wants to provide the service because they take more time, as you have indicated on your report here. The vehicles are limited, and then we're dealing with mandates of pollution control and all that weigh in at the type of vehicle you have to buy. So I think it's important to reach out to the city of San Diego, to Sandag, to the state of California. If we're serious about this at the city of San Diego, we need to reach out to everybody that say, hey, we all have a responsibility, even the airport. The airport hasn't made, other than in their facilities, I don't think they have weighed in any resources and say, we will put a proportional amount of resources into this. It takes a lot from a whole community to provide the service, not just the responsibility of the taxi cab service or non-emergency vehicles or let's say public buses. It takes a whole community, because a lot of the clients that we are transporting are low income, number one. They can't afford even a taxi ride to pay the rates of fare or the mileage. So there's a lot of considerations to weigh. in order to determine what is the correct amount and who's going to provide the service. Because it does take more of a professional driver that's sympathetic towards a person that's attached to a chair. I'm not saying that disrespectfully. I'm saying that literally they're attached to a chair. They deserve certain considerations that are that merit more sympathy and patience. So if you're doing that as a driver, that means you're being provided the same amount of opportunity of income. And it means you're less out there in the field because you're providing concentrated services to one person at a time. So having said that, I think if we're going to weigh into this a little more, I think we have to ask other municipalities of the city and state and federal government, how can the city address its issue when it's a combination of entities that have to weigh in, financially speaking, because it is an expensive venture. We're suffering to this date on parts of vehicles that are, people don't understand that when our vehicle is down, certain parts are not available like your common car. You have to wait for the part to arrive. So accidents hurt us, parts hurt us. There's a lot of determining factors that drive us to consider whether we're going to continue providing the service. So them are some things that I don't see in the reports here that other cities or other government agencies have to weigh in. That's without a doubt, because it is an expensive venture. So thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Banks?
Yeah, then you said that you're gonna be waiving the fees for regulatory fees and weight and measure. And when will that take place? When will that start? Waive the fees for the renewal, for the handicap and those things. When are you going to, would that take effect?
Well, after, the feedback such as yours and what we got, thank you, Tony, for that, feedback. And after we're done taking feedback from the committee, and not only today, our office, you can always reach out to us with, any additional ideas. We will consider them. And at this point, Alfred, this is a draft. Once it's approved, then we will reach out. For us, our waivers, then we have control over them because it's our agency. We will start working on a way to figure out how to apply those fee waivers based on our own budget, on our own cost recovery budget. How to apply them, in accordance to the goals that we have. So that would be implemented as soon as we approve this document. However, reaching out to the airport, reaching out to the sheriff's department and county weights and measures, because there are different agencies, they would have to follow their own motions to get those approvals. So we would, work speedily to get this done. But first, we're trying to figure out and not figure out, but accept this document, approve it, get it signed, and then work on a way to come back to the committee and say, we're ready to go. And now these waivers take effect and we will communicate it. And it wouldn't necessarily have to be at a meeting. As soon as we establish everything, we can reach out through an email blast and let everybody know that the fee waivers would be in effect at the time where this is final.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Abraham?
Yes, on this business, we try to put our hands in everything. We try to, business was good, there was 20 cabs with yellow cab, 5 with orange cab. Then they start that business, it was not profitable. Then they drop it. Even we applied almost 2-3 years ago with MTS, with yellow cab. But the amount of money they tried to pay was less. It does help us to provide with the MTS we have with yellow cab. So we tried everything. It's not worse. When the drivers drive the regular car and the handicap cars, it's not. It's too much work, very expensive. So it's not enough money to cover an expense unless we try everything. Unless you have some incentives to hire drivers and put the cars on the road. Unless we try everything. Thank you.
Mr. Nichols?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, it's an important issue at the airport. We deal with this daily from the curbside all the way to the gate. And it's a difficult level of service to provide on the best of days. But we're more than happy to continue the conversation, work with MTS on this project. I think it's important. I think it really serves the community well. So we're more than willing to consider any of these recommendations that you made as well. I would like to also point out that, just because we permit a WAV vehicle doesn't mean that that WAV vehicle only takes WAV trips. So it's important when we're talking about things like front of line privileges and these other things that we differentiate, if we can, the trip from the vehicle, because we don't want to provide a first of the line privilege or a dedicated spot for a wheelchair access vehicle and let him take anybody that walks up and does that. So there's some operational nuances that have to be worked through as well, but we're more than happy to continue the conversation with you and with the industry.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Mr. Nichols.
David
Mr. Jason, did you have comments? No? Margo?
Yes, if you recall years back, Tony Palmieri sat there at a taxi meeting, God forbid this, God forbid that, et cetera. I was already driving USA and I said, okay, they're going to get their medallions. I was accused of a bribe. And I said, you don't understand. My college degrees and my past experience before driving a cab are such that I have the experience for rehab, cardiovascular goodies, et cetera, et cetera. USA did a phenomenal job and they earned those medallions. And I was very blunt then and I am to this day. We have been doing and surviving on medical vouchers. So I am seeing some folks who right now are getting sicker than they were before. Others are getting better. And this is what we've been doing the last 3.5 years now because of COVID. The other kinds of business are down. In the meantime, with my background and my rehab experience, and if you notice, I have a limp, so I'm sensitive to some of the problems some of these folks have. We need some more units on the road. We have to have them. Take a look, because I am all over the county. We have not only aging people, but a ton of handicaps, multiple walkers, wheelchairs, et cetera. This is a very, very serious discussion, and it needs to go on and continue. As Tony said, if you need parts for an incident, we can't even get them on these equipment, and it's going to take time, which means the machine is down. And now we have a problem of me having to substitute tonight to help out. And this needs to be taken into consideration. At this point, let's go forward with this. Obviously, we need help from the finances for it. But when you take a look at our community and where we're going for the next 10, 15, 20 years, this is a very, very important discussion. I understand what happened with Yellow, and they took a look and said we didn't have enough business and we went out on it. But all the things that have happened in some of the other cities, and that's what Tony Palmieri was doing, all the different kinds of incidents, forget this or that, if this happens or that. We already had all of that here. And that was the beginning of initiating the medallions for USA Cab. So let's take a further look and I'll be very happy to help with this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. Again, Lenny, thank you for the research. Is there anything else you need from us right now on this?
Just to thank all the members and remind you that you can always reach out to our office with any additional suggestions. And we'll consider it as we bring closure to the document.
All right. Thank you again. Let's move to item number 7. Excuse me. Item number 6.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item number 6, review of dispatch service technology and requirements. Dispatch service technology and requirements, a common definition of what this industry standard for the last 70 years inherent to the taxi cab industry. A dispatch service is an industry standard that's commonly defined as any person, business firm, partnership, association, or corporation that receives communications from the public regarding taxi service for the purpose of forwarding such communications to motor vehicles for hire drivers. It shall include any owner, manager, employee, lessee, and any agent of said service. Dispatch service shall not include any service through which the public is able to communicate directly with drivers and shall not include any effort on the part of a driver to market his or her services directly to the public. In essence, it is a service that assigns and dispatches a taxi cab to a customer. We have seen many changes in our dispatch. Many dispatch services come and gone, out of business. A little bit of a background. For a dispatch service, consumers would contact dispatch services directly via telephone. The dispatch service that then would contact the taxi driver via two-way radio. Dispatch services are required to answer service calls 24 hours, to maintain a storefront office to turn in lost and found items and paperwork from drivers, like credit card slips and trip locks. So this is how the model for the last 40 years looked like. However, advances in dispatch service technologies are being adopted throughout the United States. Our dispatch service requirements are based from a City of San Diego City Council Policy -02, which states that dispatch must be able to receive and respond to service requests or other operational questions 24 hours a day. It must be computerized. It must be able to locate vehicles in service using a global positioning system, GPS or similar technologies. These requirements are further expanded and explained in MTS ordinance number 11 that requires taxicabs to subscribe to a dispatch service. There are currently 9 authorized dispatch services. Permit holders have sole discretion on which one to join. There are different subscription costs and use of dispatch technologies by each of the 9 dispatch services. There are no minimum number of taxicab subscribers required to start a dispatch service. Ordinance number 11 requires that dispatch services maintain and provide operation policies and procedures, and provide those policies and procedures to MTS. It requires dispatch service to receive and respond to service requests 24 hours a day, to keep written records for a minimum of 6 months of all requests for taxi service dispatch calls, and the times each taxi cab goes in and out of service. It requires to have dispatch staff person on duty for lost and found queries during reasonable hours or by appointment at a pre-approved physical commercial business location. It also requires to have a dispatch staff who has successfully completed the MTS driver safety course. For hire vehicle administration has received various requests from permit applicants and current permit holders to reevaluate our dispatch service regulations due to the following: a sharp decline in dispatch originated trips, high subscription costs and demands for upfront subscription payments, changes in dispatch technologies to provide trips, lack of modern dispatch software to facilitate compliance with the current requirements, a continuing shift from taxicab fleet ownership to single owner operators, reliance on the San Diego airport as a source for walk-up trips. Currently, over 70% of our permitted taxicabs have an airport permit. Increased competition from transportation network companies that utilize app-based technologies for trips. A decline in city street hail trips due to increased short trip mobility options such as scooters, low-speed vehicles, and other e-bikes. Enabling technology that could allow sole permit holders to self-dispatch. And also drivers who provide exclusive passenger walk-up service on private premises, such as Cross Border Express in Otay Mesa or hotels and other private businesses. The City of San Diego policy, City Council Policy 500-02 includes a provision to add additional screening criteria as needed by regulatory action to fulfill the purpose of improving industry standards and customer service and keeping current with technology, which is the reason for this discussion. We propose the next steps. We will reach out, I will be reaching out to all of our current 9 dispatch services to request information to determine compliance with the current requirements. That would serve as a baseline for our analysis. We will also conduct a peer agency review of dispatch service technology requirements from other cities, such as we did for the wheelchair accessible vehicle requirement. But for that purpose, even more cities to see what type of technologies they use. We're also considering establishing a temporary taxicab stakeholder working group to gather additional feedback and information. And by stakeholders, it could be our dispatch services, our lease drivers, and our permit holders. And of course, our organization members as the Tourism Authority and the Convention Center and the airport. Based on our research findings, we would then review whether MTS Ordinance Number 11 revisions may be appropriate to meet that stipulation from the City Council policy to provide better customer service and keep current with technology. That concludes the presentation and the intent of this discussion. I'm open for questions.
All right, thank you. Let's first hear public comment on this item.
In the interest of time, public comment will be reduced to 2 minutes per public speaker. Marissa Fisher and Jennifer Young, please make your way to the podium.
Thank you very much for giving us a few minutes to talk about NEMT. I brought with me Jennifer Ng.
I own a non-emergency, medical emergency transportation.
In New Jersey, protective care ambulance, and I have introduced to her iCabby. iCabby is a software, cloud-based dispatch and fleet management software designed for taxi and private hire industry. And we had started this in January, and we used it for ambulatory, wheelchair, and ambulance, basic life support. And we want to introduce it here in San Diego. And we are in the process of getting a large contract with a transportation broker network. And we want to work with some taxicab operators. So we're here to introduce it to you. I don't know if you know anything about iCabby, but it's used in the UK and North America. We were just there in Montreal, and it's used by all of the taxicabs. And there is no
30 seconds left.
NEMT programs in no NEMT providers in Canada, but just taxicabs to transport the disabled people and sick people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cameron Hamioy, please make your way to the podium.
Hello, Chair Ela Rivera and committee members. I'd like to ask for a waiver of the $50 dispatch change fee to incentivize proper reporting. Right now, I looked at the records, and the dispatch records that MTS has are inaccurate. And the reason is that right now someone has to go to get 2 different signatures and then drive all the way to downtown, pay a $50 fee. And if the fee is removed while this process is ongoing, you can get proper records of which subscribers are with which dispatch. And if it's just, and then the dispatches can scan and email that, it's much more efficient. They can scan the form and email it to MTS if MTS would remove the $50 fee waiver, just like MTS may waive some of the wheelchair fees. And if it's only for sending a text message, pretty high fees. So I fully support relooking at the requirements if it's gotten to the level of only providing a text message, but many of the dispatch services provide much more. And I'm aware of 3 garages right now. And so it's a good relook at the dispatch requirements. I would just ask between the dispatch garages, if there would be no putting of passwords on the different meters, because that always makes it more difficult. But anything that would
30 seconds
support
left.
the dispatches would be beneficial. And I'd finally just like to note that I'm very sad about the passing of John Kincaid. I saw him 2 months ago, and he was in great spirits. So it's a sudden, it's a shock that happened. But he contributed a lot for the past 20 years that I've been here, and the 20 years, 30 years before that with my family being involved. Thank you, Chair.
Izzy Ayala, please make your way to the podium.
Okay, and this is Izzy again. This is my last public comment, so you don't have to hear from me. But dispatch is a very really important topic to kind of get understand the philosophy, Flywheel's philosophy behind dispatch. And I think I just want to make sure that comes across. So because today's technologies and the expectations of the advent of the mobile phone and just the ease of use of being able to book a vehicle using that, we believe that for dispatch, we should strive to make everything self-service. Because they'll generate, that's the majority of the demand. So that means on the app, online on your web, scanning a QR code, calling an automated voice, they'll take a lot of that resources and get more trips into the cars. I think that's our philosophy. That's what we spend a lot of time and energy on. And then the rest of the ones that are more difficult, the wheelchair rides, the ones they have to route, the ones they have to schedule, you can focus on that type of work and be able to handle that a lot better than the majority of the trips you have here. And then, but I also have philosophy that we're not, some people think we may be anti-fleet or anti-dispatch service. No, we're not. We think a fleet provides a very valuable component to all this. It's the dispatch system that they use is what's going to help them kind of streamline and automate. So that's what us at Flywheel kind of focus on. And then the last piece is, how do we generate more demand, right? If you get more demand into your dispatch system, whether that's because it's easier
30
for a
seconds
corporation to just book a cab directly straight into the system, we think that's just another important way to generate what's important for why you would choose the dispatch, right? So those are just our philosophies. Again, streamline, automate, self-service, and then produce demand. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Horacio Sanchez, please make your way to the podium. That concludes public comment, Chair.
All right, thank you. We will now turn to the committee members. I will just note that it's 2:35, so we do need to keep this conversation relatively brief. I'm going to ask folks keep their comments as concise as possible. Lenny, and if you could share with the committee here, what would be most helpful for you to hear in terms of feedback? Is there particular types of feedback that would be most useful for you? That way the comments can be tailored in the most efficient way possible.
Certainly, Chair. Our office is always open. You can meet with me, you can call us, you can send us email communications. And I've spoken to some of these committee members. And in the past, in similar topics like these, we've established separate ad hoc groups, working groups, which I think would be conducive to getting more information on this. We can do it virtually. That way we can maximize participation. And I'm look forward to establishing a date and time, communicate it out there to the industry. That way we can have a virtual forum for questions and for feedback and to further flesh any of these concerns. So that would be a good way to gain participation if the committee agrees.
All right, thank you. So if we're gonna ask folks to hit Mr. Banks, we'll go to you, and then anybody else who'd like to speak, hit the mic light. We'll go to Mr. Taysom after Mr. Banks, and then Mr. Seifu. Again, try to keep these comments as concise as possible.
Yeah, this for Nani, is it possible to, before people have a MTS permit, can you tell them to properly, some people, when they get a square, they put 2 numbers, 2 letters, no cab number, no telephone. It's very hard because many many times I call Vito and, Vito Kelly they give me a cab number, but no name, nothing. I call. He check the person that have a airport permit, then he check who is that, then I can be able to know who's the driver. But now some people lost the item in the call. They called me, I tried to call the MTS, they don't know who is that. I call the airport, they don't know who is that. So if you can be able to tell them to fill out the square properly, have their name and the phone number and the cab number. Because 2 letters, it does not show anything. That's not the letter they use when they get MTS permit. So if you can tell them that when they get the permit, it's very, very important.
Yes, Mr. Bankins, and we do. We actually require them to prove to us that they have a digital receipt. We verify that at the time of initial inspection, and we do it randomly also. What we found, unfortunately, is that some drivers either change ownership or provide a fraudulent receipt. We compile those requests. We're keeping records of them. I plan to present to this committee some instances, but providing an accurate receipt is one of the features of technology requirement from dispatch services too. So this discussion will address that.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Tayson?
It's about time that the radio services need to provide to MTS first thing, open door policy, to have them go in their offices, dispatch services, to find out what they're doing. Second thing is to find out what they're offering for the services for the customers, for the cab drivers, receipts, trip sheets, job requirements, whatever. I also want to know what the radio services are doing to provide the taxi cab drivers business. Are they going out and knocking on doors? Are they doing whatever? I think that should be the primary outset of MTS at this moment, to provide all information for all dispatch services to the public of all the cab drivers to find what they're offering. I mean, it's like an example, yellow cab, they give out receipts, great. Do they give out calls? Yes. How much do they charge? Let's go down. I want to take me to go out to a radio service. I think all 9 should be visited at random inspection times and say, what are you guys doing for these people? Because if you don't, you don't need to be here. Because I don't even know what half the people, guys saying they're not getting anything. Are you talking to your radio service provider? Yeah, but they're not giving us anything. America, my first thing, I heard a lot about America. They're not doing anything. I'm hearing things about yellow cab. I'm hearing things about USA. I'm hearing all different things. I think it's about time we sat down and said, let's go check it out, see what they're offering, see what comes down to, how much they're charging, and figure out what's going to happen next.
Thank you, Mr. Taysom. I will include that in my outreach to the dispatch services. And if you have any more ideas, please feel free to call me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenny. All right, Mr. Seifu.
So what I want to say is, in the past 5, 6, 7 years, we came to a lot of change with the taxi cab, including removing the color requirement, the signage requirement, and things like that. But one of the outdated technology that we have in the taxi industry is still the radio services, And I know Mr. Fewell, he said we're gonna have a ad hoc committee meeting. So I know a lot of drivers gonna participate on that issue, because they've been asking me if even they're gonna remove the radio requirement as of today. Most people get fed up paying $35 on you just to get a text message on your phone. So they want to see a major change. You see some people today on the back, they just want to say something about it, but it looks like we don't have enough time. So please set up this meeting before the next MTS meeting. So we're gonna, as he said, we're gonna have, if you do a Zoom meeting, you're gonna have a lot of participation and you're gonna hear directly from these people. And there is a lot of frustration, right now out there, because I'm paying for something that I don't use. and it's because of your ordinance. So let's keep up this meeting for next one, and maybe we're gonna make a decision on the next meeting. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Safe.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to Mr. Kurma and then back to Mr. Banks. So we got another item to get through, so keep it tight.
Okay, I'm supporting Mr. Seifu's idea and then our other drivers. And I mentioned last time, couple times about the radio service. So let's remove the audience of the radio service, but whoever wants to join the radio service, let it be optional, not a must. That's it.
All right, thank you for that, and Mr. Banks.
I do not agree with that because the most important, some of these drivers, they own their car. If they have a problem, ATO give them out of service or this and that. But the people with radio, they'll be able to explain to the ATO, instead of they put them out of service 2 or 3 times, they will lose their permit to work at the airport. So I think radio is very important because the owner of radio can be able to talk on their behalf to help them that, because these people, they make same mistake many times. Then the airport can put them out of service for 3rd or 4th offense. So I know Tony understands some people, they just make minor mistake, but when they don't know what to do without a radio service people, so it will be a lot of people will be putting out of service entirely. So I think it's better for radio service. So people can do whatever they want, but radio service is very important. So that have to stay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Banks, and then we'll conclude with Margot, and then we're going to need to move on.
I have used radio service for 40 years. We need it. I understand the problems and the expense, but the other part is if your life is being threatened, you need some help. If you're in an accident, you need some help. You need fellow drivers who are close by to get to you in a situation, or you hear something and you go help out. It's not only the dispatch. One of the problems that a lot of people complain about with AI on one of the dispatches is you're not talking to a human being. But radio services, it's just part of the system. And it's anything like if your police departments and your fire, you have to have some communication with the rest of the group. And maybe we can work out a better financing situation. Maybe we understand the number of calls has gone down and there's a lot of problems, but it's an emergency system that needs to be in place. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Lenny, I heard you mention interest in assembling a stakeholder working group. Are you looking for volunteers today? Is that something that folks should reach out to you about later on?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. We are looking for volunteers. Please give me a call, send me an email if you're interested in participating, and we'll get it running as soon as we can. That way we can provide some information by the next July TAC meeting.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you again. Let's move to item number 7.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 7 is our for hire vehicle administration operations update, which we cover at every meeting.
Yeah, and if you'd like to waive the presentation on this one, we'll just see if there's any public comment or questions from the committee.
We do not have any public comment.
Okay. Any questions from the committee members based on what was in the agenda on this one? Lenny, any high level updates you'd like to provide?
High level, we did very well in permit renewal. High level permit renewal percentage of 97% overall. So we're looking good in terms of renewals, and we've had a lot of new taxi applications and NEM applications. We did see an increase in complaints. That's something that I would address, and this is an item that has to do a lot with the current dispatch services requirements and the inability for our staff to properly investigate some of these overcharging, some of these non-receipt issues that Mr. Banks brought up too. All the details are there, Chair, and I invite the committee members to check the final packet or the current agenda packet for more information, and you can contact me with any questions. And our usual airport trips, it looks like, the airport trips are certainly coming back after COVID. Similar, stable taxi trips comparison to TNCs as they keep providing more trips and taking more market share. That's a high-level analysis of the agenda item.
All right, thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay, let's move to our next item, number 8, please.
Agenda number 8, topics for our next advisory committee meeting. Continued discussions on agenda item number 4, Taxicab Uber partnerships as necessary. Again, that's the agenda item, but please feel free to reach out to our office with any suggestions or any questions on this topic. We also want to continue the discussions on agenda number 6 on review of dispatch and technology and requirements. We will also provide an overview of advertisement opportunities at the San Diego Airport for taxicabs. I've spoken to Mr. Nichols about this issue, and I look forward to meeting with airport staff. With the assistance also of UTW, you've expressed wanted to join us in those in exploring these opportunities. We will present on that at the next meeting, and also an updated for hire vehicle administration quarterly report.
All right, thank you. Any public comment on this item?
We do not.
All right, any feedback from the committee? Okay, we'll start with Mr. Girma, then Margot, and then Mr. Sabo.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I'm working on getting the advertisement on the taxi tab. We have in New York, so we're not making enough money of doing taxi business. I'm coming up with this idea, on the top. So that's a good idea we want to talk about. So we can put some advertisements, so we can get money. At least that will cover our insurance for this cost. Thank you.
You're currently able to, Mr. Girma, so long as the type of advertisement is compliant with the airport and MTS policies?
Yes.
So reach out to me if you want
Okay.
further information on that.
All right, thanks.
All right, Margot, and then Mr. Sabo.
Okay, we need to do more on the dispatch situation. In general, all of the above are very, very serious. I'm serious about the emergency stuff for dispatch. This is an emergency situation. And I understand the cost and I understand what's going on, but we really need to do some more on that. And let's have discussions on all of them. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to say, for airport issue, we still have some issues that we want to discuss. So I know, Mr. Fuel, he gonna set up ad hoc meeting. Maybe we can have airport meeting the same time, so we can have some drivers who is interested to participate, can ask some question. I have a list of questions I want to ask you, but it's gonna take us more of our time. So I rather do it on the ad hoc meetings. That I would like to ask Mark if that's gonna be possible. Okay.
Mr. Banks?
Go back to dispatch. There's a lot of people lost thing in the car. They can only have a telephone number of dispatch to ask for, they lost something inside the car. They don't know the driver, whatever. Without a dispatch, we will be lost. I think that is very important to remain. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, Margot, one last
Yeah,
comment here.
One more thing, the new yellow pages just came out. There's no taxi ads. We're not advertising publicly at places where people actually look things up to find a taxi. And I go back to many years back of how do I get a taxi cab? And people have no ideas what to do to get a taxi cab. So we need to do something about the advertising of it and where people can actually find how to get a phone number to get a cab. And the issue with the dispatch is you're using a phone number to call for a cab. So the whole thing is a situation where our advertising is down. Part of the reason for dispatch is because there's a telephone number to call. And we need to have a serious discussion of what we're going to do to keep our business in situ as is. Thank you. And have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. All right, so that'll conclude item number 8. Item number 9, seems like we kind of got into that a little bit already, but are there any additional committee member non-agenda communications? Okay, seeing none. Our next meeting will be July 12th, 2023 at 1 o'clock. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.